Welcome to Beyond Table Talk, a space for real people and real conversations that move us from awareness to action. Each episode dives deep into the issues that impact our daily lives, financially, emotionally, and socially, with real talk from real people. We're so glad you've joined us, and we've got a powerful conversation ahead. Whether you're tuning in live or catching the replay, thank you for being a part of this community. Now let's get into it. Meet our moderator.
Hello, and welcome to Beyond Table Talk, a signature conversation series powered by the Association for Black Economic Power. I'm Sharon Taylor, your host for tonight's discussion on estate planning from paycheck to peace of mind, protecting what's important, what matters. I would like to welcome my guest here tonight. When most people hear the terms estate planning, they think of wealth, lawyers, or having millions in the bank. But the truth is, if you have belongings or just $100 sitting in your account, or even children, you've already had something worth planning for. This isn't about being rich. It's about being ready. It's about making sure what you have worked, earned, and cared about goes exactly where you intend for it to go. Estate planning is really about a peace of mind, organization, and ensuring your voice is respected when important decisions need to be made. Now, I'm a little excited here, so I want to make sure I get everyone in. But before we get started, let's take a pre-survey. Please scan the QR code that you see on your screen. It's about the pre-survey. It gives us feedback on our conversation, just like this one. This one came up based on some feedback. So let's get started with the introductions. Tonight, I am joined by two experienced professionals who bring real-world insight to this conversation. Mr. Kylie Dimery, please introduce yourself and share how your work helps people prepare financially while building security for their future.
Thank you, Sharon. I appreciate the introduction. And my name is Kylie Dimery, founder of Dimery Wealth Advisors. We are a full-service wealth management firm, and we help our clients build, manage, preserve, transition wealth throughout their lifetime, beginning with the big picture in mind. So essentially what that means is having detailed conversations about what your financial future looks like. Oftentimes, the conversation is about retirement. So how do we build a retirement plan that you look forward to, something that you envision for yourself later down the road? And it's built on four cornerstones. Essentially, in my particular business, the conversation usually starts around assets, investable assets such as retirement plan assets or non-qualified assets, but we'll build allocation models for clients. But the second cornerstone is going to be more about asset and income protection, which kind of falls into that estate planning piece. However, we do use different types of insurances as a strategy within the comprehensive wealth model. The third cornerstone is going to be tax efficiency, but the fourth, which is going to be the topic of today, is going to be the estate planning. So I partner with people like Lee Lafayette in terms of being able to help our clients plan for the unexpected. So wills, trust, power of attorney, healthcare directives, things of that nature. So it's a full scope when it comes to the comprehensive model, but it's a teamwork effort as well when it comes to planning for clients, meaning that I work very closely with estate planning attorneys and CPAs and insurance specialists.
Wonderful. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And thank you for teeing up our other guest for tonight, Mr. Lee Lafayette from Law PLLC. Please introduce yourself and tell us how your work helps families and individuals protect what matters most.
Thanks, Sharon. I am Lee Lafayette of Lee Lafayette Law. I provide estate planning for families and small businesses. I also handle probate. Now, what I do is estate planning, and that means that I'm helping to secure your legacies. Now, not only do I help to make sure that your assets pass down correctly, but in estate planning, we're also making sure that if you were to get ill, we provide like direction on who would take care of your children and what your wishes would be if you weren't there to make decisions for them. And we'll get into the rest during the presentation.
Wonderful. So it sounds like a full scope all around, not a cookie cutter version of estate planning. So welcome to you both. And to our viewers, your voice is a part of this conversation. So please leave your questions in the chat and we'll try to get them answered live. And if you have any other things throughout the broadcast, please let us know. So I'm going to get started with Lee. When people hear the word estate, many people think of mansions and millionaires. What does estate actually mean for everyday people?
Okay, for the everyday person, an estate is simply everything that you own. So I think of it, just think of it as your stuff, right? So that could be your house, your cars, your bank accounts, your retirement accounts, all the way down to your pots and pans or what's in your storage, right? So in estate planning itself, you also want to make sure it also can involve, like, again, your kids, your health, and decisions to be made if you can't make them yourself.
Cool. So anything that you own, and okay.
Kylie. Even your
Okay.
digital assets also. I just wanted to make sure I said that. Even your digital assets.
Yep. I'm sorry, say that again.
So even your digital assets, think like your Facebook accounts, your social media accounts, all of that these days. Yep.
Oh, wow. I'm glad you brought that up. It's something that I think most people aren't thinking about.
Right.
Your digital assets that you call them. Oh, perfect. Okay. I'm interested. I'm tuned in now. I really want to know more about that. So we may come back to that. Kylie, if someone doesn't own a home or have a large investments, what are a few examples of things that they already have that they should be included in an estate plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think Lee touched on it already. But if you don't own a home or large investments, you may have kids. So if you have kids, in the event that something happens to you, the parent, who's going to take care of your kids? Who's going to be the guardian of your kids? So you want to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row and think about, if I'm not here, who would I want to raise my kids? So you want to think about guardianship and also understanding the person that you select. Perhaps you have a thought in mind in terms of how you want your kids to be raised, where you want them to go to school, values, principles. So all these different things you think about as your kids are being raised. So I will speak for myself and say, if anything were to happen to me, I would want somebody that understands my principles and values. And the person that I select as a guardian, I would want them to raise my kids in that particular fashion. So that's one of the things that I think about. But I'll also share that I'm part of the sandwich generation. Mm-hmm. So, which means that I have elderly parents that I have to care for, as well as my young kids. Yes. And so when I think about people that don't have a large amount of investable assets, even if you have a little, you still want to have a plan for that. Because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you dictate exactly where your assets go, who gets them, and when. So those are the things that I think about. If you don't have a home or a large pot of assets, I think it's still really important to plan. And let's just say, for instance, if you had a life insurance policy and you have young kids and you want the proceeds to go directly to your kids in some form or fashion, maybe indirectly, well, that may mean you might need to do a little bit more planning on the estate side. And I'm pretty sure we'll get into this, but perhaps a trust for the benefit of the kids, which means that you probably want to think about a person that you trust that can act in a fiduciary capacity to manage the assets for the benefit of your kids. So those are the things that I think about when people are just getting started, haven't accumulated a lot of assets, but you want to start somewhere and make sure that you're doing the planning.
Perfect. I see we have a question for a viewer who tapped in. What about pets? Would you see that as an asset? Or was that a part of estate planning?
Yes, it is. And pets are actually considered tangible personal property. But there are clients that want to have actual pet trusts. So yes, pets are part of an estate plan because you do. Actually, I've had clients that I've seen it where people are arguing over who actually gets the pets. So
that's right.
If you really care about your pets, you really should actually include that in your estate plan.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see that. Kylie mentioned will in there. I'm going to take that and move it on to you, Lee. We often hear about people or hear about wills and trust, but people aren't sure which one applies to them. Like, what is a will? What's a trust? When do you need one? Can you explain the difference in the simple terms? And can you like just clarify when each one would make more sense to get?
Yes, right. And so the decision is always up to the client about which one they choose to pursue, but I give explanations on both and then the client decides. So we'll start from a will. The first thing I want to say about a will is that you can get far with a will, but a will is only effective at death, right? A will is only effective after you pass away, as opposed to a trust. And we're talking about revocable living trust here, which can also will take effect while you're alive, right? But a will, I want people to know that a will is a public document. So if a will ever has to be used, in the probate world, it's public and everyone can view it, right? So when you think of a will, it tells like who's going to inherit your things, who you're going to put in charge of that, and you can list things like where your real estate goes, who takes care of your kids, etc. Now, situations in which I would recommend a trust over a will is when you have minor children, when you have blended families, when you have a business or real estate investments, when you have someone that's addicted, have an addiction in your family, I'm sorry, such as like gambling or drug addiction. If you're a very private person, and if you have children or someone that you're going to leave something to that has disabilities. That's the short version of it.
Okay. I think what I hear you saying at the same time of that around that privacy, because it is a public document,
Mhm.
people can access that and say, Lee left Sharon $50,000.
Right.
And
Right.
you may not, people may not want that to be public.
Right.
Like lottery winners might not want to have how much exactly they have left to whomever. Da 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 da. Am I getting that right? Am I
You
reading
are,
the
and
signs
you
on
are,
it?
and I'll provide a little clarity. So it's, most of the time when I do will plans, the goal is for that will never to be used, and we plan for assets to pass outside of probate. But if the will does have to be used, it's going to be a public document because it's going to be a court process. Now there are times where it just makes sense for the will to be used. That's when we have blended families and people want things to go to different places. But I just want people to know that it is public if it has to be used.
Right. Okay, that makes sense to me. So, Kylie, it looked like you were going to chime in with something. Did you have something you were going to add?
No, but I can. And I would say that full disclosure, as a wealth advisor, we touch on these things high level. This is Lee is a subject matter expert. So essentially, I have these conversations high level with clients with the objective of being able to tee the conversation up for a favorable introduction directly to people like Lee that can go deep into the weeds with the client, have these discussions, figure out what's the best course or path for that particular family, and Lee can help guide them through that process. But Lee just mentioned something that I think is really important. I think it was around the question about family pets and if there's an argument between family members. I think it's really important to make sure that you have a clear path. And in some cases, if you are planning for your estate, everybody's family dynamic is different. So in some cases, people can have that open conversation with their family about what their wishes are and their intentions are.
Yeah.
And I think that really can help at the end of the day in the event that something were to happen to you and you have a clear plan in place. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I think that too. And sometimes, I mean, when you are mourning, what may have started as a clear plan may not be so clear during that time. So it'll be helpful to have that documented. Things change quickly. I'm going to ask you both to chime in on this one. Like, what's one common misunderstanding about estate planning that keeps people from getting started? And how can we change that mindset?
I'll chime in first.
Yeah.
So I think it kind of goes back to one of the first questions in terms of maybe I don't have enough assets, or I don't own a home, or maybe I own a home but it's not worth very much, or I don't make enough money. And I think we all have to start somewhere first in the first place. And as you build your foundation, you at least want to start having that conversation. And I think, in my opinion, comprehensive planning and estate planning is essentially about knowing what you have and what it can do for you and your family and or your business. So you want to make sure that, one, you formulate a team and have discussions about what are the next steps I should be taking, and get information, have the proper resources around you. So have conversations with an estate planning attorney or maybe a financial advisor. And maybe what that entails is having conversations with people that you know and trust that can make favorable introductions. But I think the thing that holds people back is, I don't make enough, or I don't have enough. Even if you have kids, you should definitely have that conversation and understand what it really means to have a foundational plan when it comes to the estate plan to protect you and your family.
That's awesome.
Right. And I'd say that one, I think people assume that life goes on. And what I mean is that spouses think they automatically get access to their spouse's things, and they don't, right? Even let's just take a bank account, for example. If you're not on your spouse's account and they pass away, you do not get access to that account, right? You're going to have to, at minimum, file a small estate affidavit to get access to that account, right? And what I think a thing that people don't realize is that doing nothing, meaning like not creating a plan, actually costs a lot of money if you have to go to probate, right? And to piggyback off what Kylie said, so people think they don't have enough to have an estate plan, but I actually think it's the opposite, right? So what I mean is that, let's say we take someone that's wealthy. If their estate plan isn't perfect, they're fine. Their beneficiaries are going to be fine. Now take somebody that has a little bit of things. That estate plan needs to be tight to make sure that your beneficiaries get what you worked your whole life for.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's not necessarily like wealthy. I think oftentimes people equate that, but I would assume that really wealthy people have their estates in order because, like Kylie said, they have a dynamic team. And so they are protecting their assets all the time and watching their portfolios and doing.
And Sharon, I just want to say this real quick. Some of the biggest fights I see, it's not about money. It's about stuff, right? It's about stuff that the memories are attached to. It's the small things that people always think that their children wouldn't want. That's where I see most of the fights.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I may add, there's some pretty big names out there that I think are pretty notorious for not having a plan. And Lee probably knows more about this than I do, but Walt Disney is one of them. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I believe Prince as well didn't have an estate plan.
He did not.
Yeah.
Well, I heard for various reasons on that one, but what you're advising, one being like a religious reason, but what you're advising is, especially for people, I'm going to say like families that I know a lot of who grew up, hardworking mom and hardworking dad, they bought a house, may have you paid that house off. They're now, to your point, Kylie, about being a sandwich kid, in their 70s or 80s. The house is paid off, but feel like, well, I'll give it to my child without an actual plan in place. What would you recommend on where to get started? What's the first thing to do?
Yeah, I would say that one, it's you mentioned a few key things there, and hardworking is I think the main thing is that you work really hard to build and accumulate. You want to make sure that you can preserve it and transition those assets to exactly who you want and when. I would say the first step is, going back to one of my last comments, is that you want to build a team around you. And perhaps if you don't have any resources directly, if you don't know an estate planning attorney or financial advisor or CPA, Talk to people that you believe may have those types of relationships. Have a conversation with them about what that relationship looks like, how those professionals have helped the person that you know, and perhaps even ask for an introduction, and just start interviewing estate planning attorneys and financial advisors and CPAs, and vet them out. Get a really good feel for who you feel like you're most comfortable working with. And everybody's not going to be a good fit. There's going to be some professionals that may have certain requirements in terms of net worth, things of that nature, but don't let that be a barrier. There's going to be some hurdles that you're going to have to get around or jump over. But I would say just create this model of discipline that you worked hard, you've accumulated, your family deserves to reap the benefits of your hard work. And you, as a person that has accumulated those assets, I personally feel like I want those assets to go to exactly who I want them to go to at the time of my death, or create a plan to make sure they're going to get what I intended for them to have.
Awesome. Okay. Before we go on, because this is really related to like everyday people and everyday protection. So I want to hear from a story from Colleen. Colleen wants to share. We have Colleen here on the show to share a story on this topic. You'll hear from a local entrepreneur. She calls herself a solopreneur. And she admits she didn't always have assets or investments. Let's take a moment to hear her story.
I didn't think that I needed a will, but I was working for an accountant, and he asked me, so what would happen to your house or your car or anything you own? And I said, I have a loan on a car and a loan on my house. Who cares? I don't need a will to protect that. The bank will just take it back and do whatever. And so we talked a little bit more, and he said, okay, well, what will happen to your children if you're not around? And then I went, oh. And he said, well, the judge will, they'll go to the judge and the judge would decide. And I said, oh, no, I want to decide. So that's when I said, I'm going to get a will, because I wanted my children to be with the people that I thought would raise them closest to the way I would have raised them if I weren't around. And so I talked to the people that I wanted to be my children's guardian after I was gone, and we got the will set up. Then later on, I did own some things. I almost owned my house. I had a car, and I had the beginning of a retirement account, and I wanted all of that stuff to go to my children. And so I worked with a local attorney, and we set up a trust as well, which I still have to this day. And you can move things in and out of it if you want to, but the trust was the sort of like the holding area for anything that I wanted to be able to pass on without it going through probate.
Wow, that is, real life story, protecting what matters. I love how she initially said, house, car, I don't care. I still own that. But once it hit home, it was about, well, what about your kids? And what about them being in court? I believe we have Colleen here today to speak to her. Colleen, are you able to come on? There she is. Hi, welcome. Welcome, Colleen. Thank you for sharing such a powerful story and your reflection, especially as we talk about tonight's topic on estate planning. It wasn't about the wealth for you. And I would suggest my parents are probably thinking the same thing, like, whatever, you guys figure it out. But it's about the intention. Can you share more about your story? What else? And then I'm going to ask Kylie too to jump in, and of course, Mr. Lafayette.
Yeah. So, as I alluded to in the video, and Kylie mentioned it too. Number one, it started with, I do want to protect my children. And then I had some equity in the house. And so we did the trust. And it just sort of, you keep looking at it. This isn't a one and done, because your situation's changed. They're probably going to get into that later. But then I also, after I resigned from a full-time position and I started a business, and then I'm buzzing along and all of a sudden I think, oh, wait a minute, what would happen to my business assets? So then I go back to the attorney and get some paperwork done so that my daughter, who's now, in her 40s, she has power of attorney of my personal stuff, but then I wanted her to have power of attorney over my business assets too. So that's just kind of from the beginning of, oh, I don't need anything, to, oh, now I need to keep looking at it, and I need to keep changing things as my situations change.
Wonderful. Kylie, I want you to start with what stands out most to you about this story, and bring the point on home for us.
Yeah, a great story. And I think starting out, it's again, why do I need a trust or an estate plan? And I think it just goes back to really understanding what's really important for you. And I think the triggering moment for Colleen were her kids. And so a few things I've heard tonight so far in this discussion, and being able to have control. I think we've heard probate, and oftentimes in a probate scenario, decisions will be made for you, possibly by the court system. However, in the event that you have young kids, it might be beneficial to have a trust. Depending on your situation, every situation is different, but that's a really good way to make sure that you have control of the situation and to avoid probate. And so now a trust, and Lee can probably confirm this, is that it's not going to be the most tax efficient way to manage the estate. However, if you want full control and you want to avoid probate, trust may be a really good way to go. So you know exactly what's going to happen as you carve out your game plan to transition assets to your family members. But the one thing that really stood out is, why do I need a trust? I don't have a whole lot, but kids, really important. So I think it just kind of goes back to what's really important for me and my family and the business as well.
Wonderful. Lee, from a legal perspective, what moments like this do you see that spark people to finally start planning?
Wait, I want to touch on what Colleen said first, then I'll come back to that.
Yes,
So
yes.
what I got from Colleen's situation is that I want people to realize that estate planning is for the people you love. It's for the people after you. It's giving them peace of mind, because they're the ones who would have to clean up your mess if you don't take care of things, right? And I want people to realize that everyone has a plan. If you don't create your own plan, Minnesota has a plan for you. That's called passing intestate, right? And I'll give you one example. So if you're a person that's not married, you have no children, you know where all your stuff goes? It goes to your parents, and that could be a parent that you've never met. Okay. Now repeat the question again, Sharon. Your next question.
I'm stuck on this now.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Oh my, Colleen, really, again, I appreciate you sharing your story. It will hit home for a number of people, and they can relate to this story and also see why it's important for estate planning. So again, I want to thank you for that. I was asking Lee from that legal side of it too, and I think you answered it in your
Right.
question.
What typically was it what typically triggers people to come to an estate planning?
And then
Right.
you also mentioned, what if you don't have children? And so, so I think that hit home.
It tends to be life events, right?
Yeah.
So it's the rare person, and there are those people that they just have everything together. That's why, oh man, I just want to get my estate plan done. It tends to be life events, right? So I think it's either they seen what went wrong with their parents or their friends, or it tends to be, I have a diagnosis, now I have dementia, right? Or it can be happy events like think birth, marriage. It's always the opposite too. Death, divorce. It goes both ways, but those tend to be the triggers when people finally come in. But hey, as long as you get it done, good on you, Colleen, for getting there.
Yeah, and I love of these two that we said once you got it done, and life continued. Because to your point, Lee and Kylie, it's about the other folks and making sure they're good. But you also said, I started a business, and then I went back to make sure things were in order again. So that too, I think, is a critical component, Colleen. And you had the insight to do that. Was there a particular reason, or was it under the advisement of the advisors?
Sorry?
Was there a particular reason? Did you know to go back, or because you had a team that
Because I already had something and now I had a new asset, right? I had my business and I went, wait a minute. And it took me several months to figure that out. But, so that's the thing that, I think is most important is every time you have any kind of event, as Lee mentioned, you need to look at or just go talk to your estate planning attorney and say, I got this happening, this going on. Yeah. What do I need to do with it?
From a monetary perspective, just for our listeners too, and Lee, Kylie, is there a charge for that each time you come in, or is that part of the consultation? What can you tell us about that and fees that people should anticipate?
I'll defer to Lee since that's more of a direct question for the estate planning process. But then I'll chime in on my process. But I'll defer to Lee.
Okay.
So in Colleen's situation, that's just that's referred to as funding an asset to the trust, right? Mm-hmm. And it depends. Sometimes we can just provide guidance where some people are capable of just doing it themselves, because I can just give her the language to do it, depending on which asset it is. But there are times where funding, there would be a small charge. Typically, the lawyer will fund all of the real estate into it happens, but let's be honest, we get paid for our time, right? If it's going to take a significant amount of time, there probably will be some sort of fee, I'd imagine.
Sure. Kylie.
Yeah, and from my perspective, our model is going to be a little bit different than Lee's. Whereas when I sit down with clients, we charge a fee for assets under management or financial planning fees. So I would say 90% of my business is going to be advisory based. And so part of that model is doing annual reviews with clients. Now, depending on the client, if they're retirees or pre-retirees, we're getting together quarterly, but those conversations every quarter, it might be different. So this time of the year, we could be gearing up for taxes. We could be talking about tax loss harvesting and the amount of portfolios. We could be talking about, just top of mind things that's happening from an economic perspective, what's moving the markets. But the other thing is going to be reviewing, say, beneficiary designations. Has there been any major changes? Has there been any major life events? And that's really important because Lee touched on this earlier in terms of if you are maybe designated as the executor of an estate, you may want to think about having an asset cash account where you're joint owners, so you have immediate access to cash in the event that anything were to happen to the owner of the estate. But that's all to say that we don't charge a separate fee for having that conversation about the estate planning process. Mm-hmm. However, we just charge a fee for assets under management, which is an annual fee. But part of that process is having the annual reviews, and we'll discuss all these different things, which may be really important for the client. So there could be some things that I may bring up in conversation that triggers the client to go back and have the conversation with somebody like Lee.
Makes sense. Yes, Lee.
And since we're already there, Sharon, and I would like to say the way estate planning typically works is that there's a flat fee for everything up front, right? So to get the entire plan done, and then there'll be a 3-year review or something. But in Colleen's situation, similarly, if there's assets later that we need to put in, that's what I was speaking on. But yeah, estate plan doesn't have to be cost prohibitive because, for example, somebody like me, I've had clients that it's taken a year to pay for the plan, but I just let them pay monthly, just like you pay for anything else, until they got there. So like, if you want to get there, we can get there.
Oh, nice. Okay, because I was going to ask you about some affordable ways, and I heard you say a couple of different things. Like once you get started, you can work out something to make it feasible for families or people to get started. But also, there may be some free ways. Like once they've gotten started, you can advise them on here's the language you can add to that trust around, and document those kind of wishes. As far as estate planning overall, when we look at like healthcare directives or power of attorney or naming beneficiaries, those kind of details, where do people go? Is that Kylie, you, or is that you, Lee? And Colleen, you may have something to add to this too. So if you do, feel free to let me know that as well. But where would they do that? Go ahead, Lee. Lee's on the edge of his seat.
Okay, because just if I have clarity on the question, right? So an estate plan, in my opinion, is incomplete if it doesn't have something that takes care of healthcare or like a financial power of attorney, right? So I think if we're talking in the world of will plans, that there's an argument that a healthcare directive and a financial power of attorney are just as important or more important, because those documents take care of you while you're alive, while a will doesn't take effect until you die, right? But you need all of them, right? So I would tell someone to start from the attorney general, state attorney generals. They have good information for estate plans, and I think they have some financial powers of attorneys at least. I can't remember if they have healthcare documents, but I know they have a lot of documents on for estate planning. And then there's also wills for heroes if you're a first responder, which works for you or your spouse. There's the Minnesota State Law Library. I had a list that I came up with. Apologies. I can look and find it for you over here in a second. I'll let them jump in right now while I look for the rest of them.
Okay, and we can make those that list or information available to our viewers. So no problem. We'll get there. All right, Kylie, Colleen, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? Otherwise,
Yeah, I'll jump in. So, and I think I second everything Lee said. The healthcare power of attorney is obviously a really important component. If I'm planning my estate, and this is what I've done for myself personally, and I've had the opportunity to help my grandfather through this process. And in his particular case, I was the executive of the estate, the trustee, healthcare power of attorney, and it is a task. There's a lot that goes through it, that goes to it. But what I've also learned is that for my own personal plan, I want to make sure that I'm choosing the right person that can actually perform in that particular circumstance. So if it's more financial, the power of attorney, financial power of attorney, I want to make sure it's somebody that has some sort of financial wherewithal to kind of deal with that. And somebody on the healthcare side that might have the savvy to kind of deal with the healthcare professionals, things of that nature. Now, in some cases, it might be the same person. But I think it's really important to think about those things as you kind of go through that process. And, when you're having conversations with professionals like Lee.
And I'll just say real quick, originally my parents had my medical and financial power of attorney, but as I aged, they aged, obviously. Right. And so now it's my daughter that has that. And I know she has the financial, and she may be a little shaky on the medical part, but she's got her brother to help her with that. So.
Wonderful. That's a great thing to add.
I real quick share that. Well, something funny is that while my sister is a nurse practitioner, I think she would be too emotional to be my first healthcare agent, so I don't have her as my first. Yep. Even though she knows the most.
Mm-hmm. That brings me to a question. Have you, Colleen, and please feel free to say, answer however you feel comfortable, but have you had the tough conversations with your beneficiaries saying, here's the plan, here's who I've allocated, or I wish to enforce this? So like in this case, Lee says, did you tell your sister it's not you? I don't want you. So my question is, have you been able to have that conversation? And if so, would you share any insights that would
Absolutely. I told my children I was going to do it. I asked them what roles they wanted, and they have copies of all the documents. So they know exactly who does what when things need to be executed.
Nice. Oh, thank you for that. I think when we talked earlier about, making the waters a little calmer as you plan for when we're not here any longer. So, that's perfect. Well, Colleen, I want to thank you again for joining us tonight. Please feel free to stick around through the chat and let us know if there's something else you have to add. But we want to say we appreciate you here at ABEP and anytime.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me.
All right. Have a good rest of your night.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Oh, that was awesome. I love whenever we can bring in some real life stories and make it all make sense. Because sometimes we're talking, it can go over people's head. It's a lot to take in, especially when we talk about the emotions. I want to bring us down to protecting what you have started with talking about. So, who would you trust to carry out your wishes? Like we were just discussing, is parents, siblings, significant others, adult children, nieces, nephews. And if you have any other insights you would add to that, like one of the things I think is most important is you be the person to sit down to have that conversation with them. What are your thoughts on that, Lee?
So I have many clients that are on both sides of this fence. If I'm understanding the question correctly, I have clients that do a plan and they have no intentions of telling their kids or beneficiaries what's going on. They're like, they'll find out when I pass away, right? And I have some that want to tell them, and then I make copies of everything and I send it to them, right? And then I even have clients, they think that by not telling them, it forces them to have to be together and deal with each other. I don't know if I agree with that, but I mean, hey, that's what their wishes are. But I think as far as like choosing who you want to act in certain roles, it's like Kylie touched on earlier. It's just different, man. You just have to think about who can handle those roles, right? Because I know often I'll have families that say, we don't really have anyone that's that financially savvy. Then I do ask them if they have a financial advisor that can step into that role, or even if they have a friend. Because one thing I want people to realize, it doesn't have to be a family member in these roles, right? Mm-hmm. It can also be a friend, because let's be honest, sometimes we don't have a person in our family that we feel can handle that situation, because occasionally I'll have plans where everyone was disinherited aside from the friends.
Yeah, that's a good point. And sometimes our friends are like family, right?
Right.
Yeah. You know, I would say that, you certainly want to give it some thought in terms of who do you really feel, regardless of age, and the dynamic of the family. I would say think of the person that you feel that's really equipped and has the integrity that can carry out your wishes, that will act in a fiduciary capacity to carry out your wishes. And that it's going to take some time. It really is. And I think one of the toughest challenges that we go through in our particular culture is talking about death. You know, when that comes up, it's like, okay, I don't want to talk about this, but it needs to be talked about. And I can speak for myself and share with you about my own personal experience. I mentioned my grandfather and helping him. As we speak, I'm settling his estate. So we have the conversation about rebooting his estate plan a little bit more than a year ago, and we got it executed. He did pass away in June. Now, mind you, I'm the grandson, so I have uncles and aunts that I'm dealing with as well. And the dynamic is, well, I'm older than you. I should be in control. Well, okay, that's all fine and well, but that's just not the way it's going down, because for one, it's not about what you want, but it's about what the person that actually created the plan, what they want and what their wishes are, and who has the wherewithal to be able to carry out the plan. So there might be some scenarios where it might be tough with dealing with family, because it's always not going to be the siblings getting along and everybody agree with everything in terms of who gets what. There's going to be the opposite side of the spectrum where people are going to say, well, I was promised this, I was promised a house, so I should get this, which makes it even more important to kind of go through this process dot all the I's, cross all the T's, make sure you select the right person that's going to carry out your wishes in a fiduciary capacity. And when I brought this up to my kids, my oldest is 29, and I remember specifically having a conversation with her. And when I brought up my particular plan as it pertains to what's going to happen with the assets in the event that anything happens to me, the first thing that popped in her mind is, okay, what's wrong? Why are you telling me this?
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling you this because I want to be proactive in my approach.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong. I'm okay. But these are some of the things that we need to be talking about periodically. I'm not going to overload you today, but here's a little bit. And I share a little bit more as time goes on.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're starting to understand kind of the flow of the conversation and the intent and the overall goal. But I think it's really important to think these things through, make the proper selection. And Lee can attest to this. I mean, you could always make changes midway down the road. I mean, you could always pivot. You may think you have selected the right person, and a few months later down the road or a year down the road, you may realize that, okay, maybe that wasn't the best selection. Maybe I need to reboot the plan and make some changes. So I'll pass it over to Lee.
Right, and I will say take geography into effect when we're talking about like the healthcare directives. I would say like if you have someone that lives in state versus out of state, that may make more sense to put the person in state first versus second.
Okay, something to that makes sense and logical. Just someone who's there can get over, do whatever needs to be done immediately versus traveling.
Right.
Okay. Thanks for that story, Kylie. That too, that resonates a lot with me, and I'm sure with other viewers on how that can look. And people who may have not had a will, a trust, or estate planning in place, but are family members who are now contemplating that same situation or being in that. And I love how you added that you don't have to wait until you're sick or wait until there's a problem. Like, let's start having these conversations in increments, if necessary, to with family members now.
Yeah, and if I may add to that, Sharon, you know, the way that conversation came up with my grandfather is that he's a state away, or was. He was in Wisconsin, and it took a family event. We were sitting at the hotel after my uncle had passed a couple years back. So, and I'm sitting with another uncle as my grandfather's sleeping in the hotel room, and I specifically asked him about my grandfather's estate plan. Now, I was told that, well, everything is airtight, everything is under control. Are you sure? Yes. A couple of weeks later, sitting down with my grandfather as we're playing dominoes, and I asked him point blank, is your estate plan in place? He said no. Oh. And I said, well, why not? And he went like this. I said, well, it's because of the money? He said, yes. I said, well, okay, Pop, we got to get this in order. And he said, I want you to do it. I said, okay, well, I can look into it. Long story short, from my understanding is that on the research that I did, I could probably do the estate plan, but it can be contested because I'm considered direct family. I don't know how much truth there is to that, but I wanted to reduce the liability. And I said, let's meet with an estate planning attorney and let's go ahead and map this out the right way. So my point in all that is sometimes if we are in that sandwich generation, we may have to do some probing. It might be an uncomfortable conversation with your father, your mother, or your grandparents, but you have to probe a little bit just to make sure that they have everything in, all their ducks in a row as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, that brings me to tonight's disclosure that tonight's discussion is for educational purposes only. We at AVEP are advising you to please consult with a licensed legal and financial professional for any other guidance. So thank you for mentioning that. And Lee's cracking up because he's like, I am a legal consultant. And then we are saying consult with those people. So thank you for bringing that up. I do have a couple questions. One that came through from our comments from one of the viewers, and it is around being a trustee or being a beneficiary. Do you have to do exactly what's in, what's been laid out in a trust, or can you deviate if you see that there may be a reason for that? Can you do that? Can you legally deviate? And if so, Tell us more. Or I'm going to
Well,
ask Lee.
yeah. Well, clearly I don't. Okay, let me phrase this correctly. So, if you are the trustee, right? So you are a fiduciary, right? The point of us making a trust is that we want to pick a person that's going to follow what's in our trust, right? So if you pick the person that's not going to do that, you probably picked the wrong person first of all, right? But we can draft trusts to where, matter of fact, it's beneficial to draft trusts where there's flexibility built in, right?
Mm.
But I'm trying to now. I don't have complete clarity on this question because it sounds as if this person may want to do something completely different from what the trust says. So again, I'm not your lawyer. I'm not gonna go. I'm not gonna go further than that with that question. But you're acting as a fiduciary in that sense.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Follow the plan. In other words, as much as don't be hard headed. I asked you to do X, Y, and Z. Do X, Y, and Z as much as possible without it. And that sounds like to Kylie's point too. You may just stay out of a little bit of family drama if you follow the plan, So, okay. And then with that being said, Kylie, how often should we review or update our wills or beneficiary or like insurance information, that kind of thing? What's your recommendation around that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm gathering that my cadence is going to be a little bit different than Lee's cadence, but I say at least once a year. And I'm speaking through the lens of financial advisors. So as we have a comprehensive approach, we're reviewing investments, insurance, beneficiary designations, and just having a conversation about, okay, what's happening in life? I mean, what's changed since the last time we met? Somebody getting married, new baby, somebody going off to college, we plan for college. So I think it's really important to make sure that we are having a conversation about major life changes and making the necessary adjustments within the overall comprehensive plan. But I would say if nothing major has happened, I would say that cadence should probably look like every 3 years, in particular to the estate plan. But I'll let Lee share a little bit more about his cadence.
So my cadence is every 3 years or life event, right? So if we're similar to Colleen earlier, if there are asset changes, then you need to come in, right? If we're in the trust world. But other than that, it's life events or every 3 years. And of course, if we're talking older clients, I'd want them to come in a little more frequently because I know this is high level. I don't want to get super deep, but there's a 5-year look back that we may need to protect against assisted living and nursing facility, but we're not even going into that. That's way too too deep into the woods for this presentation.
Well, something to be thinking about, though. At least flag if that's something people are concerned about, and then we could probably maybe there's a second segment or something. But
well, yeah. On that note, that's a really big one too, and that's really worthy of a whole nother panel discussion because you want to start the planning for that sooner than later, and that's a really good way to erode whatever retirement plan assets you may have set aside in the event that somebody needs long-term care. But yeah, that's a whole other segment. But that's a really good point that Lee made.
Yeah, an excellent point. Kylie, you brought up something about just the planning for children. And I want to bring that to when we talk about, from a financial advisor's point of view, generational wealth. How is estate planning essential to building and or maintaining that kind of what we hear now, Black wealth or generational wealth? How is this an essential component to that?
Well, I think for the most part, when you're kind of going through this process, again, I kind of think about, what are you working for? What's really important for you? What's your goal and objective as it pertains to yourself and your family? And I don't want people to look at the estate plan as a cost. I mean, I think it's an investment in yourself and your family and your business. Mm-hmm. And if you kind of, I don't know, I think if you cut corners, it could cost you more in the long run if you don't do the proper planning and invest in yourself, invest in your family and your well-being. So I think overall, it's part of the comprehensive model. Mm-hmm. It's one of those really important components when it comes to preserving and as well as transitioning of wealth. And there's that conversation about accumulating wealth, but transitioning the wealth to the people that you really want to have it, but in a tax efficient manner as well. So it's all part of the wealth planning process. I think it's really important that you have the right professional that can help you in that particular area, have periodic discussions, figure out how you can improve if there's the ability to do so, but also just being diligent and really disciplined about how you approach the wealth planning model. But in this particular case, the estate plan.
Sure. Lee?
Yeah, to follow up with that, most people's assets tends to be the house, right? And that's where people tend to make the biggest mistakes, right? So most of the time I'm in probate is because people didn't pass the house down correctly.
Oh.
So that's a waste of money and a waste of time. And when that asset gets into court, then the creditors are coming from everywhere, right? So to touch on how estate planning can really be a generational wealth tool, let's just stick with the revocable living trust, right? So this is where asset protection comes in. So once the revocable living trust goes down to the next generation, now that's where the asset protection comes in. So now if your kid gets married and then that they get divorced, within that trust, we can keep that money in there, right? If there's a car accident, this money is now untouchable. That's where all the asset protection comes in.
Okay. It sounds like we're going down to that second segment now.
Oh, okay.
Estate planning 2.0.
Yeah, I didn't want to go too.
Yeah, but that's
I think one thing I think that needs to be said though about estate planning. One thing you don't want to do is I see it becoming a battle in blended families of who lives the longest. And something that people don't think about, we never think that our spouse or significant other will get remarried if we pass away. It happens a lot. So if you do, and if you don't have the correct estate plan or a trust, I've seen situations to where what you left doesn't actually get to your kids because your spouse got remarried and it went with them because they live longer. So that's for people that really care about things like that. That's another reason to get a plan together earlier than later, right?
Yeah. That completely makes sense. And it leads me to one of the last questions before we end tonight, is because our subject was around protecting what matters. Right. And so we bring this home, bring it on in for people who are listening. I mean, there's a lot to think about. And I love how you guys gave some very clear direction on where to get started. And they're pointing up some action steps for us. We can see on the screen. What steps will you take this week to protect? That's for our viewers, to protect what matters. Share that in the comments for our viewers. So what steps will you take this week to protect what matters? And I'm going to ask the two of you, as we talk about the phrase protecting what matters, what does it mean to you now that you've given so much expertise tonight? And how would you hone that in? And what's the lasting impact do you want our viewers to take away? Lee, you're thinking about it.
Yeah.
Okay. You want to share?
Yeah. So I can think about, I'll come from my own family, right? I have a wife and child. So if something were to happen to me, I'd want my intent and my wishes of how I want my son to be raised written down somewhere, right? And that's what my trust does, right? And in there, I want to name somebody that's going to rear or raise my son the way I would want to be raised. Now, that can be done inside of a trust. For example, I want someone to say no when I say no. Now, an action step, a simple action step that somebody could take this week that we haven't talked about is simply putting pay on death on your bank accounts. That's one that we all can do. And it's a simple mistake that gets people in trouble all the time because banks don't tell you this. So just go to your bank and do what's called asking for a pay on death and then name a beneficiary.
Okay. At the bank, ask for this form that is called a POD, pay on death. And it's really just asking who do you want to leave your bank account to? Make sure they don't have a safe deposit account somewhere. And if that's the case, but making sure that is it enough to be on their account with them? Like
yes,
if
so
they're on the account, they still need the POD, right?
right. And as an attorney, I
Okay.
don't want to go too deep. No. If they're joint, they don't need a POD.
Okay. All right. But get a POD
Yeah.
and at your bank, talk to them about their internal forms. And like you
Yes.
said, a lot of banks won't tell you that. Kylie, what's the one action step? And we got the shot clock rolling.
Gotcha. Okay. The dovetail on the POD, I'm going to say take it a step further if you have a brokerage account, and also list the TOD, which is transfer on that. So exactly the same thing, but it's a brokerage account, not a cash account, but the same concept. Do the exact same thing. I would also say create your own personal balance sheet. Start listing your assets and create a net worth statement. So list your assets, your liabilities, and at the end of the day, when you minus out the liabilities, that's going to give you your net worth. But make it a project. What is that going to look like in a year from now? So if I want to grow this by 25%, what do I need to do? Whether it's putting money into an account, investing that money, but also making sure that I identify all my assets, and is it worth it to start building a team, having a conversation with guys like Lee about, all right, here's what I have on my balance sheet. Do I need your services? Do I need a will? Do I need an estate plan, trust? Should I talk about healthcare directive? All these different things. Just start building it up, putting it on paper, and start building a team around you. And I would take it a step further. Not only just an estate planning attorney, CPA, insurance agent, financial advisor. Just start building some trusted advisors around you. That would be my recommendation.
Thank you. A lot to be planning for as we plan to protect what matters for us. In closing, let's remember that estate planning is not just for the wealthy, it's for anyone who wants to take control of their future and protect the people they care about. We give a huge thanks to our panelists tonight for sharing their insights. And before you go, please take our wrap-up survey. It helps us build programs and that meet your needs. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. You see the QR on the screen. And thank you to our fabulous tech team and everyone at ABEP. Have a wonderful night. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Beyond Table Talk. We truly appreciate you, our viewers, and we want to give a special thanks to our moderators and panelists for sharing their wisdom tonight. You can check out their bios to learn more and their contact information. We also want to thank our sponsors who make these conversations possible. And we encourage you to stay connected. Follow us on social media, engage with the conversation, and share with your community. If you'd like to sponsor an episode or get involved, we'd love to have you to be a part of this journey. Scan the QR code. We take this moment to thank our incredible team that brings this program to life. Before you head out, please take a moment to fill out the post-checkout form. Your feedback really matters. Let's keep the momentum going, and remember, the most meaningful conversations don't just happen at the table, they live beyond.